Before you hang your stockings this Christmas, why not make some that become part of your family tradition? Today I'm going to show you how to make a beautiful wooden stocking you can hang by the fireplace. All you need is a scroll saw to make this project, which will look great for years to come. Let's get started. This is what I'm going to be making today, these Christmas stockings. That's from Steve Good's site. I will give a link in the description. The front is made from 1/4-inch thick material. I'm going to use vaulted birch plywood. The back will be the same, and the middles will be out of 3/4-inch wood. Since the front and back of the stockings are cut from 1/4-inch material, I'm going to stack cut 2 at a time. I cut blanks a little larger than the patterns, and I'm using blue painter's tape to hold them together. You don't want one of the layers to shift while you're cutting. You don't have to measure the strips, just estimate the length by eye to ensure they're long enough to hold the board securely. Once I'm done taping, I'll take the top pattern, the one with snowflake, and cover the back with spray adhesive. I'll do that in a separate area with plenty of air circulation. I set the pattern inside a cardboard box with the sides cut down to only a few inches deep and no top. The cardboard catches the overspray from the aerosol can. Be sure to carefully follow the spray can's directions so the pattern will adhere properly to the tape. It's very frustrating when a pattern comes loose during cutting because it wasn't properly skewered. I attached the pattern to the blue painter's tape. The next steps will be to prepare the back and the top trim boards in the same manner, then drill the pilot hole for the snowflake decoration and the holes in the upper right-hand corner for hanging the stocking. If I recall correctly, that hole measured 7/16 of an inch. I happen to have a 7/16 red point bit, but you can use whatever you have that's close to that diameter if you don't have a 7/16 bit. There aren't many cuts for this project, so it shouldn't take long to make. I'll start with the snowflake cutout on the front of the stocking. I drilled the pilot hole in the center of the snowflake shape, and I'm using a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade for this cut because it's a complex pattern with many quick turns. I base my blade size on the hardness and thickness of the wood as well as the complexity of the pattern. I felt the blade coming loose in the upper blade holder, so I briefly stopped cutting, tightened the thumb screw, and then resumed cutting. You develop a feel for your saw over time, and a change in sound, vibration, or how the blade is cutting will give you a clue that an adjustment is needed. The snowflake is cut as a single, very long line with a combination of straight sections, curves, and sharp angled turns. A beginner could use this pattern as an excellent learning tool to practice most of the moves used in scroll sawing. An experienced scroll sawer should have no trouble cutting this snowflake. Cutting the lines and curves is simply a matter of following the line and letting the blade do the work. The sharp angles are what separate the novice from the expert, so let me show and tell you how to make these cuts. There are plenty of them to practice on with this piece. When you're cutting a straight line or curve, you continuously feed the workpiece into the blade. But when you come to change a direction that contains an angle coming to a point, you need to proceed differently to prevent the point from turning into a curve. I cut until the blade reaches the point where the line changes direction, forming an angle. Then I back up the workpiece very slightly, just enough so it's no longer cutting. With the blade still running, I swivel the workpiece until it faces the direction I want to cut next. I'm able to do this because the blade can move up and down in the curve created by cutting to that turning point. Plus, I believe that part of the blade can nibble away a tiny portion of the waste area off to the side of the cut line. It takes a bit of practice to become proficient at this maneuver, but it's one you'll use over again in just about every scroll saw project. This snowflake is created by repeating the same patterns continuously to create the 6-sided shape. I checked the video before editing and found it took me 6 minutes to complete this shape. I didn't think you wanted to hear me talk about nothing for the next 4 minutes, so I sped up this section. Somehow I still get a kick out of seeing myself work at super speed. With the snowflake cut from the interior, I can now make the exterior cut, and then I'll have 2 stocking fronts completed since I stack cut them. This is an easy cut, mostly with gentle curves and straight lines. The directional changes aren't difficult to make. If you've watched many of my videos, you probably know what I'm going to say next. Take your time and let the blade do the work. The pattern peels off the blue painter's tape easily, as you can see. Next, I peeled the painter's tape off the top piece, and that went well too. It usually takes a little bit longer to remove the tape from the bottom layer, but it's still easy. When you think about the time saved by cutting 2 parts and the time would take one, these few seconds of extra work are well worth the effort. There are no interior cuts for the back, just one long exterior cut identical to the one I just completed, so I didn't feel it was necessary to show that. There are 2 parts for the top of each stocking, one for the front and one for the back. The front piece has the word Noel cut into it, and I'll give you some tips on cutting letters as I do them. I'm still using the number 3 Pegasus Modified Geometry blade. I drilled the pilot hole for the N near the upper left-hand corner. I cut from the pilot hole to the point in the corner where the horizontal and vertical lines meet. Then I backed the blade to the pilot hole, spun the workpiece 180 degrees, and backed the blade dull side first to the corner. Now it's easy to turn the workpiece so it faces the right direction to make the horizontal cut at the top of the N. The next turn is a large enough angle that it's not too difficult. I only have to hesitate slightly as I approach the diagonal line, shift the workpiece, and then resume cutting. At the bottom of that diagonal line, there's a sharp angle that I need to handle a little differently. As I reach the point for the next directional change, I stop cutting but leave the blade running. I swivel the workpiece, not cutting, letting the blade run in the curve just created. Once the wood is lined up to cut in the next direction I need to go, I start cutting again. I'm now at the bottom right side of the N, and I need to make a 90-degree turn. This turn, and any similar to it, are made in the following manner. I cut to the point where the 2 lines meet, and I need to make a 90-degree turn. I pull the blade back a tiny bit, just enough so it's no longer cutting. I swivel the workpiece 90 degrees, using the curve just created plus the waist area, and then I start cutting again. This is a technique you'll use over and over again when you're scroll sawing. If you need a sharp corner, this is the way to make it. The times when the corner is not rounded, you just keep cutting the curve without stopping. The letter O isn't difficult to cut, but it gives me an opportunity to explain 2 reasons for a cutting rule I made for myself to ensure letters are cut accurately and look good. The O is cut in 2 parts to avoid leaving just an open oval rather than a recognizable letter. The 2 sections of the O come rather close together, so I cut on the inside of the line rather than right on the line as I do for most cuts. Cutting on the line may leave so little material that the center part could break out during handling. So this is my first reason for the rule. The second reason I cut on the inside of the line is to maintain proper letter spacing. The letters on this pattern are fairly large and spaced adequately, but that's not always the case. If I cut on the line, the spacing can become somewhat reduced and the letters can become a bit crowded. That's the second reason I always cut on the inside of the line when cutting letters. Cutting the E and the L requires one skill, and that's the ability to make sharp 90-degree corners. Let me cover that in detail. First, in accordance with my letters cutting rule, I'll stay on the inside of the line. This doesn't mean I'll leave any of the lines showing, just that I'll barely touch the line, leaving the waist removed as small as possible to keep the pattern strong. I cut from the pilot hole to the nearest corner, and when I reach it, I back the blade up slightly, just enough so that it's no longer cutting. With the blade still moving up and down, I slowly swivel the workpiece 90 degrees so it's lined up with the direction I want to cut next. I'm able to make this turn because the blade can move in the curve created by the first short cut. The important thing here is to keep the blade inside the line. If the curve alone doesn't provide enough room to turn the workpiece, the waist area can also be used. If you stray from the line, be sure to stray on the waist side. You can always go back and clean up the cut later if needed. All that remains of the stack cuts are the exterior cuts for the front and back top pieces of the stocking. These are straight cuts with rounded corners, so there's nothing here I need to explain. Then we have the stack cut for the back of the stocking, but it's exactly the same as the exterior cut for the front, so I won't show myself doing that either. The remaining part to cut is the 3/4 inch thick middle, which gives the stocking depth. I'm making this part from poplar because I want to paint it red, the same as the front and back of the stocking. I've already cut one of these, but there was a problem with the video, so thankfully I have a second one to cut. That's the reason for that odd-shaped piece missing from the middle. I cut both middle sections from one piece of poplar and overlapped them to use the smallest possible piece of wood. I switched to a number 7 Pegasus modified geometry blade for the 3/4 inch thick poplar. It's relatively soft and the pattern has no difficult cuts, so I was able to move to the larger sized blade. There are some 90-degree turns here, and they're done the same way I described previously. Cut to the corner, back off pressure on the blade slightly, swivel the workpiece to the new cutting direction, and then start cutting again. I don't know why, but I didn't record the glue up step. Fortunately, there was nothing unusual or difficult about this assembly, so you should be able to perform it with no problems. All you need is a glue bottle with a small tip and some clamps. I used F-clamps for this project. As always, I welcome your comments and I respond to each of them. I'm already working on my next video, but until then, there are 2 suggestions on the screen for what to watch next.